Hi guys. In my last video, you'll remember I started putting together the main part of the figure for my self-portrait. Today, I'm going to go through hollowing this out. Before I start getting into the nitty-gritty of adding the details of like the facial features and the hair and clothing, the figures on top of the head, and all the other little details that are involved, I want to go in and take out the clay that is making this a solid weighty piece. So if you will remember from the last video, I built this main part, the shoulders and the top of the chest area, out of just a solid piece of clay. The neck was a little coil that I cut out from the bottom of it, and then the head that was attached to the top of that coil is also solid. So I could go in with my loop tool, okay, and I could just start to hollow out from the bottom and create that open space. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to slice this in half. This clay is still very, very much plastic. It's very pliable at this point. I can easily cut it apart, take that clay out, and then score and slip it to connect it back together. So I think in this case that's what I'm going to do, because that'll allow me to see the thickness of the wall throughout really easily. If I just go in kind of blindly from the bottom, sometimes it's hard to tell how deep you need to go in to make the wall up here, and then especially getting into the head, the same thickness throughout. So I want to be able to see that. So how I'm going to start this is I'm going to take my clay cutter and I'm just going to set it straight in front of me and place my sculpture right down over it so that this is as close to the center of it as I can get. Now, I'm going to cut it in half using my clay cutter. If you feel a little nervous about doing it this way, you can certainly use your butter knife. Just make sure that when you're slicing down through it, you're not sawing it, okay? That can really push that clay out of form. So what you want to do is you want to just make a nice, clean, steady, slow slice down. Probably take it, if I were doing that to this, I would go down one side and then meet it on the other side until I get all the way through front to back of that figure. Okay, here I'm just going to simply wrap my fingers around, start to guide that clay cutter up, pull it up through the body into the neck, and into the head. Okay, so if I turn that now, you can see it's not a perfectly even cut, but again, I'm not concerned about that. I'm going to piece it back together when all is said and done. But if I open it, you can see the interior pretty easily. Okay, so I'm going to begin to take my, actually, before I take my loop tool, I'm just going to designate where I want that wall to start on the inside. So I'm just going to take my little toothpick, again, use pencil, pen, maybe you have a skewer, and you can use any of these items as a drawing tool. And I'm just going to outline the wall and where I want that to be. So I'd say anywhere from 3/8 of an inch to about a 1/2 inch thickness for your wall is perfectly acceptable. Once you start getting into like 3/4 of an inch and definitely an inch, a full inch, that's just a little too thick. It'll take this a long time to dry. Okay, so I just outlined where I want that that hollowing to end so that I have a pretty even wall going up into my neck and around the top of my head all the way through. I'll even do that on the bottom just so I can fully see where that line is going to come around, okay? And that just gives me a basic guideline. So I'm going to do that on this one. Okay, so now that I've drawn those lines, I'm ready to start using my loop tool to cut out the interior. So I'm just going to push that in, pull it around along that line I just drew, and begin to hollow that out. You may find it useful to save some of these little pieces of clay that you're pulling out if you have intention to use them for coil building. Just wrap it up in a little baggie as you're hollowing it out. So I'm going to continue to do this. I'll speed it up here. All right, so I've hollowed out that first half, and as you can see, there are a lot of marks still in there left from the loop tool cutting out those different areas of clay. So what I might suggest doing just to strengthen it is go in and compress that clay, use your thumb, pull those areas together, smooth it over. It doesn't have to be immaculate, but it really does help to tighten and strengthen the clay on the inside, as well as what we'll be doing to strengthen the clay on the outside. So overall, it'll just make it a much stronger, sturdier piece. Okay, so start to use your finger, like I said, smooth that out, just like we did with the interior of our pinch pots. And all of this clay that I carved out of the inside, this is still very soft, plastic, pliable clay. So just ball that back up and put it back in your bag of clay for use on other pieces of this project. Okay, I'm gonna hollow the second half out. So I've hollowed both sides out. I've gone in and smoothed and compressed the clay on the inside just to strengthen it some. If you happen to get a little too vigorous in cutting out some of that interior clay, and you find that when you're smoothing you've got a few little weak spots, or maybe you even actually go all the way through the wall of the clay and you make a little hole, that's fine. Don't worry about that. Because this clay is still relatively soft, we haven't let it get to that leather hard stage just yet. It's really easy to fix. So just take some of that soft clay that you cut out of the inside and simply score and slip and patch that area back up. So right here, the back of my shoulder area, if you can see that. That area just got a little too thin, so I want to make sure that that stays nice and strong in that area. Especially, I might go back once I finish kind of putting this back together and I start in on some of those details. If I'm planning on carving any part of the exterior to give it some texture or to you know, add some detail of any kind, I want to be sure I have enough clay there in order to do that. Okay, so find any of those little weak spots, any thin areas, and patch those up. I just scored and slipped, attached a little bit of clay there, and then just use my finger to smooth it over. And it should be as good as new. So now that I've taken care of all of those little thin spots, I've smoothed it out, I'm going to piece this back together. I'll go ahead and score using my homemade serrated rib. The edge that I cut, the line that I cut through my piece initially, might be a little altered at this point. But again, the clay is pretty pliable at this point, so I'm not too worried about putting it back together. If it was leather hard, it might be a little bit trickier to make those pieces fit snugly back against one another. But because it's pretty wet, when I go to push it together, got a little gap down here at the bottom, you can see I can really just move that clay into position in order to get it well secured. You can see a little bit of that, that movement on the back too. Okay, so I'll just make sure that I give it some really good pressure when I go to connect it. Give it some good slip. And then give it good pressure. Okay, and then once you see that slip squeeze out a little bit, oops, make sure. Okay, so that slip should be squeezing out. You shouldn't have any movement when you go to pick it up. It should be really well adhered at this point. So I would say at this point in time, just let that slip dry over that seam a little bit so that it's not really slippery. You can go back in once it's a little bit drier and really use that dried slip to kind of smooth over that seam and get it really well connected back together. Okay, so just set it aside. I'd say, 15 minutes or so. Come back and use your thumb, use the back of your spoon, and start smoothing that. So this is smoothed over on the inside and the outside for the most part. That seam has, for the most part, disappeared. However, if you're having trouble getting that seam to completely mush back together, then take your serrated rib and go over that area, kind of crosshatch diagonally back and forth. Okay, so rough that area up with the serrated side of your rib, and then you can take the smooth side of your rib and pull over that area. And that should erase that seam. Okay, you can also use your spoon for the same purpose, or your finger. And just give that area a little cleaning, a little refinement, okay? And then if your piece got pushed out of shape a little bit, just go back and pinch it. Pinch it right back into the shape that you want it or that it was originally in, okay? So as you can see, this looks, for the most part, similar to what it looked like before I hollowed it out, but now it's much lighter. You can see that clay is gone from the inside, and I'm ready to continue moving forward on the exterior details.